Welcome to USC and to the Sol Price School of Public Policy. Very pleased also to welcome you to the Spring Forum of the USC Center on Sustainable Cities. It's great that you can be with us today. We're dealing with a very timely topic, obviously, of drought-resilient cities, which living in Los Angeles, probably no more important topic that we face. Before I begin, I wanted to acknowledge one person in particular, and that's Dr. Hilda Blanco. She's the director of the Center for Sustainable Cities and also a leading scholar on climate change in cities. And she did all the work, great work in organizing the forum and putting on the program today. So Hilda, thank you very much. The Center for Sustainable Cities really exemplifies the Price School's interdisciplinary approach to public problem solving. The center in this case aims to improve the environment as well as the social equity of cities, and it does that through interdisciplinary research, education, and outreach programs. To date, the center's raised in its short life around $1.2 million of research funds to support research on greenhouse gases, water scarcity, and sustainable cities. So it's brought leverage and resources to bear on these kind of topics. The topic for today, drought-resistant cities, focuses really on an issue of critical importance, not only in Los Angeles, but regionally and statewide and in the Southwest. And the purpose of the forum is to bring together experts to foster dialogue and hopefully find solutions and approaches to dealing with this serious issue. We're hosting this conversation in the midst of the lowest level of rainfall that California has had in its 163-year history. And just a few months after Governor Brown declared the drought a state of emergency, and with reservoirs in California at a startlingly low, less than 20% of capacity. We're really in uncharted territory. This is unprecedented, not only for us who are alive today, but in the known history of California also. So given the urgency of our dry climate conditions and the increasing water scarcity in the arid Southwest, we're really pleased to be able to bring together a distinguished group of experts to explore ways to make our cities more resilient in these kinds of situations. And so we're going to have the opportunity to hear from some USC scholars, architects, engineers, experts on sustainability, whose work addresses the challenges concerning water management and drought resilience. So I hope you find today's discussion thoughtful and useful, and I really thank you all for coming and for your participation. So thank you. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Hilda Blanco, the director of the center.
Thank you so much, Dean Knott, for taking the time to welcome this forum on behalf of the school. Let me also welcome you on behalf of the Center for Sustainable Cities. At the center, our research focus on sustainability challenges facing metropolitan areas, which are at the core of sustainability issues. For example, we know that it is urban areas that generate from 1/2 to 3/4 of carbon emissions, and thus urban areas are key to reducing greenhouse gases. And as greater percentages of global populations migrate to urban areas, it is in these areas that sustainability challenges and climate change impacts will be experienced by most people. Our approach at the center to these challenges is interdisciplinary, systems-oriented, and based on empirical research. We seek innovative solutions that are evidence-based, feasible, and effective. Faculty involved in the center have focused their research on various aspects of climate change and its impacts on urban regions. Last year, for example, our spring forum focused on the draft National Climate Assessment for the Southwest region, to which I contributed as a lead author. And today is a very exciting day. In addition to this forum, this morning, the White House released the final National Climate Assessment. And as my colleagues on the Southwest chapter recently put it, the story of the Southwest is the story of water. And so it is not a surprise that the national assessment stresses water scarcity as a major impact of climate change for the Southwest region, to which California belongs. And my own research focuses on urban water supply challenges for our region, and so I am very pleased to be able to bring to you this forum today. Turning to our program, we have a wonderful group of people that will make presentations. We will follow the sequence in the program. First, we will hear from our keynote speaker. Then we will hear a series of presentations. After them, we will have 2 discussants and questions and answers from the audience. And the closing remarks we will have from Professor Daniel Mazmanian. At the end of the program, we will hold a reception in room 308 in this building, to which we invite you all. And first of all, I want to recognize also the support of Southern California Edison for the center and for this series of spring forums. And today we have Jesse Langley from Southern California Edison's local government partnerships in the audience. Welcome and thank you for your support. There have been many conferences and forums on water policy over the past few months due to the current drought. In the Los Angeles region, we have had forums on the likely trends in the future, on state and local policy, on how to finance water infrastructure needed, and on similar topics. The current drought provides a teachable moment, a great opportunity for public education on this topic that is typically reserved for experts. Our forum instead begins from the premise that Southern California will be facing greater water scarcity under climate change. It focuses on strategies to implement conservation and renewable strategies to meet current and future challenges. It emphasizes projects and tools that have the potential to transform our cities into more drought-resilient cities. It is the time now to move beyond focusing on the problem and begin to focus on solutions. This focus is important for several reasons. First, the public investments and changes in the urban fabric that are needed to make urban life more sustainable and resilient to greater water scarcity will require greater public understanding. And the project scale is the scale that the public will more readily understand. Second, it is at the implementation scale that policies interact with people's daily lives and therefore can have a transformative impact. Water projects have the potential to enrich urban life by making an essential but invisible infrastructure visible. Urban water is an infrastructure, and we take it for granted. We pay little attention to it until times of emergency arrive. We have to stretch our imaginations to understand how this essential element of water is generated through general cycles and how it is conveyed to us. And for those of us in Southern California who rely on imported water for about half of our supply, it is difficult to understand and keep in mind the intricate pathways and treatment that a glass of water represents. Invisible, but also substantial, is the investment in electricity that our water supply requires. Nearly 20% of electricity use in California is devoted to water. Water engineers and economists are now counting on smart water meters to give us, the consumer, price signals about water usage, and in this way to help us conserve this precious resource. But there are other ways of making infrastructure visible. For me, one of the most memorable ways of conveying the hidden structure of urban infrastructures is a short story in Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. It's a story of Armilla, which is, and I quote, "A city with no walls, no ceilings, no floors, that rise, nothing that makes it seem a city except the water pipes that rise vertically where the houses should be. A forest of pipes that end in pipes, in showers, in spouts, in overflows. Against the sky, for example, a lavavo's white stands out, or a bathtub, or some other porcelain, like late fruit still hanging from the boughs." Today, we have to exercise our imagination, as Calvino teaches us, to see the natural cycles, how we harvest water in far-off places, and the conveyance infrastructure that brings it to us. But we can do better. We can make our new projects not just utilitarian, but meaningful, artful. And by art, I mean not museum art, but the concept of art as experience, art as enhancing everyday life, as suffusing daily life with meaning, with heightened vitality. As John Dewey, the great American philosopher, put it, art is experience charged with enjoyed meaning. Such a concept of art rejects the split between the useful and the artful. It argues that the ultimately useful is that which contributes to an enriched life. In this way, we can meet the challenge of water scarcity in a manner that transforms and enhances urban places and the urban experience into not merely more resilient, but more coherent, closer to nature, and fundamentally beautiful places and ways of life. The projects and approaches that we will learn about range from urban regeneration and placemaking projects, multiple use projects, such as the Gilbert Preserve, where both utility, ecological reserve, and nature recreation are combined. The wide-scale water harvesting projects that Australians have developed. The repurposing of alleys to both green our cities and capture rainwater. And finally, we will hear about a tool for figuring out places in the city most suitable for different water projects. But before we get to the project scale, our keynote speaker will provide us with the issues and policy framework that makes the projects that we profile important. In closing my remarks, let me remind you that the city is now the dominant human habitat. Water scarcity presents us with not only a challenge, but an opportunity to transform our cities into places with deeper connections to our local environments, into more meaningful and vital places. And now for our program. Since we have bios and a tight schedule, I will do minimum introductions, and my main role as chair will be to keep time. So now let me introduce our keynote speaker, Maria Mehranian, who understands these issues from the standpoint of a prominent engineer responsible for large-scale projects and a state regulator who heads the Los Angeles Region Water Quality Control Board. We are delighted to have her share her insights with us on water policy and how it relates to the project scale. From policy to projects, how changing water policy in California impacts local communities is the title of her keynote speech, and let us welcome our speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilda, and thank you, Sustainable Center, Sustainable City Center. I know that today we're going to hear a lot about water policy, water supply, water quality, but I'd like to start with the concept of adaptation and the whole idea of adaptation versus status quo, because through adaptation we learn about stories of survival and success, and the whole idea that the dictionary defines this word as responsive adjustment, and the idea of changing the ways we do things versus going with what we know and how we know it. And the whole idea that status quo is not going to get us, or the ways we know how to do is not going to get us through this. There is no doubt that we have regional challenges. Of course, the drought, Hilda mentioned it, but we have problems even before the drought. So we have, as we all know, we are a water importing region. We have the wrong amount of the rain at the wrong time at the wrong place, and we continuously have to move water. One of the facts that I learned lately that 48% of all the energy generated is used to move water. So that is like a major issue that we have to deal with. And then we have local aquifers that are overdrawn or contaminated. I mean, we used our wells to irrigate, so we overpump them. And whatever we have due to industrial activities, the legacy contamination is contaminated. And it's a huge cost to deal with it. However, it's something that we need to deal with. And then, of course, this happens at a time that the municipalities are financially stressed. They're letting go of their police and the teachers, in the firefighters. And here we come as regulators and tell them, oh, you have to clean your water, or there is this much bad stuff that you can put in the water, and these are the thresholds, and you have to go meet them. So now let's go to the drought. We start with the drought, and this is a picture of the Folsom Lake at 2011 and 2014. And it's a pretty grim picture of what it is. But let's go and learn a little bit about history, some history. So we have the Earth with 4.5 billion years of history. And through this whole year, all these years, the last 500 million years, we concentrate and we see all these creatures, our friends, the dinosaurs that come and go and all that, come to last part of this. And let's go to see what happens when when human beings or our ancestors start. And there's one important fact here. The curve down is global and climate change. So human being historically has always dealt with climate change. And temperature change has been a constant. And somehow we dealt with it. And going to the next slide, we will see the ones of us, there's this 100 years that we have had the highest and the most severe change in temperature. And let's go to the next one and see who survived. The people with bigger brain and bigger skulls. So we have survived this. So if adaptation helped Homo sapiens, it can save us. So we can do this. So moving on from here, but how are we going to do it? Okay, we have the drought. So how are we going to resolve our issues? The way we can deal with this is by continuing to adapt to a changing environment and by seeing new opportunities, using every measure we have and finding new ways. So opportunities, for the first time, and this is again from the regulatory side, I think this is an opportunity for us to view the stormwater and wastewater as resources and not as waste. To understand that water supply and water quality are two sides of the same coin. That the more water we have, the better the quality gets, and the more we clean our water, the more supply we have. And that there is no clean water versus dirty water, but there's one water. And that is probably the time for us to really come to see that approach and look for facilities that can help us, create infrastructure that can help us utilize as much of the stormwater and the wastewater that we have. And then allow municipalities and the dischargers to organize themselves on a watershed basis, to come up with regional approaches to wastewater, and to create projects that not only benefit one community, but the watershed, and not only cleans the water, but also has recreational values. And of course, finding new funding sources. That's a never-ending question. I think that this is really a nice chart explaining that the answer, our approach, is we have to do all of the above. We, of course, have the delta, which we have to continue to use to find ways to restore it, to move some of its water down. We have the Sierra Nevada mountains. We have the State Water Project. We have the LA Aqueduct. We have had these, and we've had it for a long time, and we're using it. What we have to really bring it into the equation is to start looking into the local groundwater, water recycling, conservation, and what we can get from the wastewater. This chart that is created by Urban Water Management Plan shows how we get our water in 2010. As you can see, most of our water comes from Metropolitan Water District, 52%, LA Aqueduct, 36%, and then we have 11% in local groundwater and only 1% in recycled water. So if we want to think of what we can do, this whole idea of adaptation and survival in 2034, of course we're still going to use the aqueduct and MWD water, but it is how we can shrink them and bring in local groundwater, recycled water, continue with our conservation policies, stormwater capture, which is really starting to pick up right now, and of course, water transfer. I want to talk about a little bit the whole idea of regulatory environment and how the policies can be innovative and how they can really bring about different kind of change. And I want to talk about MS4. MS4 was a permit that we have had it for many years. It's a stormwater permit. It is required by Federal Clean Water Act. It's implemented by regional water boards. In our area, Los Angeles district, there's 84 municipalities plus the county, which represents more than 300 square miles of area and 4,300 miles of storm drain. So this last year, we had to adapt. We had to go through all the regulations, and we had to, after revising what the permit is and what the requirements are, to adopt our new permit. And there was something, I think, there that is very special, which is this whole new approach on regulatory environment and a regulation, not in a punitive way, not in a way to try to resolve issues overnight, but to give time and ability to the dischargers and to the cities to tailor-make their ways of how they deal with cleaning their stormwater by creating BMP measures and the ability to have time to monitor. And as long as the dischargers and the cities are showing us what they're doing and how they're improving their existing water, then we give them time. And the most important thing that built in this whole permit had was the Enhanced Watershed Management Plan, which is, again, the regional approach to wastewater. So if the cities of one watershed would come together and would develop a plan that they all first can reach the economy of scale, and then can do something that is very specific to that watershed with its own needs, its own issues. And I think that was basically, I want to call it innovative regulatory policies. So as a result of that comes a lot of good projects. And I would like to, not only MS4, but all these other permits that we took for water quality, number of projects came out. One of them is Tahunga Wash. That is a gravity-fed pipe that on an average year when you have 325,000 gallons of rain, is enough for 760 families for 1 year. Plus it creates this environment, which is a natural, usable, or not really usable, but recreational area. And then the next one is North Atwater, that is funded by Proposition 50 and provides structural and natural solutions, revitalizes a wash and kind of creates a green area, all coming out of the regulations. And then there's Ed Reyes River Greening Project, which is between Avenues 18 and 19, has not opened yet because it's missing a gate right now, but collects 135 acres wastewater, stormwater from 135 acres of land. And what it does, while it collects the water, it cleans the trash and all the bacteria in the water. So moving on from this, I want to close and leave you with some thoughts of we need a new approach, and I call it an old new approach, which starts with adaptation, which is not new to human beings, and to create new ways of doing things, and then to search for multiple solutions, really. I mean, we can't, it's not only, okay, should we build the delta or not? Or should we do the recycling or not? It is to find all the measures, all the infrastructure, and all the projects that we can fund to do all of the above. Recycling is major that we can start doing it. Of course, at the time of drought, it's going to be harder. Stormwater capture projects, cleaning of the wastewater, and then have really creative regulatory environment and integrated leadership. It's very important to bring together the environmental experts, the technology, the political, elected and appointed political bodies in order to coordinate this whole strategy and approach of how we deal with the water crisis. And I just want to leave you with the thought of, to resolve this crisis, we need more than one silver bullet. There is not one silver bullet for this.
Good afternoon. It's always interesting to come to these wonderful afternoons and find, of course, that you don't have to lecture to the experts about some of the issues that we're here to discuss. You know, what I bring to the picture is how some of these policies and regulations can be deployed into solutions. As a couple of you have ably said, that it's a lot about education, and that we have to change our perspective about beauty. You ask any normal person, even those who have grown up in Southern California, and of course I grew up in the tropics, so if I would have been shown some time ago what does beauty mean sort of in an urban environment or in a park, it would have been extremely lush green by default. I still think that's the case. I don't have, in an academic institution, I don't have hard facts, but I have facts enough from thousands and thousands of community meetings where we talk about these issues, and it's all about dry. So I actually have found myself over the last few decades finding a way to really understand nature and the natural systems in the dry parts of the country. And I am a self-imposed ambassador of dry. My passion for dry in this group is not going to be quite as sort of interesting as it is when when I'm in the middle of Ohio and they have no idea what this all means, and hence the fact that, of course, even Washington, D.C. does not understand our river, right? I mean, California, a river, Los Angeles, a river, where's the, how do we actually get the resources and the funding to implement some of these projects? So we know that, not only is water is a precious resource, but it's a finite resource. And, recently, in the last years, I've been sort of exposed to this notion through the U.S. Water Alliance about something we always thought about, but the branding is so fantastic, and that is one water. Let's not think about water in all these layers, or it's one water, and we all have to understand it, and we all have to really approach it as this sort of all-encompassing resource and all the issues that it brings that are brought to the table. Of course, we have to become more water independent, and we have to learn how to use all the resources, including reclaimed water, especially in our fair city, but protecting our aquifers and really understanding gray water better from a policy perspective, et cetera. So again, I bring, and I actually am, my husband is Michael Lehrer, and he has a firm of architects, and we are a firm of urban designers, landscape architects, MLA, Mia Lehrer and Associates, and we also have now a nonprofit called LA Más, as in more for more of anything, and basically it's basically it was a strategic decision with a group of young graduates who wanted to really sort of explore ideas and issues in a less conventional way and through less conventional funding strategies. And since I usually do a lot of pro bono / guerrilla planning efforts, you will see some of them today. Actually, I happen to be probably by definition a nonprofit anyway. But so what, this is kind of our attempt at the logo that maybe One Water will one day use. But what we're, we understand, basically this is the transect in Los Angeles as defined, in terms of the mountains, the foothills, the sky. And so stormwater, gray water, and then reclaimed water, and of course, groundwater. And how we have to always be thinking of it. And of course, solving, we like to think that we are able to, as multidisciplinarians in our profession, and there is a landscape architecture program within the architecture school in USC that's really growing and developing. A few professors are here today. We're solving, we learn how to solve complex problems through multi-beneficial solutions. And of course, we're hoping to be building for resilience by really understanding and many of the strategies that we deploy. And metrics are really helpful to all of us to really understand, whether our solutions have what kind of long-term impact they have. And they are, generally speaking, in our profession, because landscape is somewhat ephemeral, kind of hard to quantify, but we are making progress. And I'm on the board of the Landscape Architecture Foundation that's actually doing a tremendous amount of work in this area. And many of us get involved in supporting policies and bond funding strategies. And we are aligning, we're hoping that the public agencies are aligning with the vision and hope to be there to support these activities. And of course, leadership is of the essence, as well as where I started, which is promoting civic education. So I'm going to go through a few projects. Owens Valley Lake, actually this is the dust mitigation project. Many of you might not know, but actually Owens Valley Lake, which used to be 110 square miles, is only 26 square miles now. And of course, it's mostly mush and muck. It is basically a storm. It's a very windy condition in this part of the valley, and the minerals that are in that area get actually you can measure them all the way to Japan, which is pretty. And we are operating, meaning we, DWP, and myself as a consultant to DWP, are trying to find a way of solving this sort of wind condition. So we're doing it, it's a public health issue, and there is a lawsuit that, has to be a federal lawsuit, and it's called the Owens Dry Lake Phase 7, which is our area. This is most of the solutions are really difficult to really sort of understand, but it's either water or planting or decimating a hillside for gravel to actually calm down the lifting of all this soil. So we're working through the process, hoping to eventually find some really interesting strategies, including some mushrooms and algae to help us with some of the problems. The LA River Revitalization Master Plan, again, the plan was based on a mandate by the federal government in terms of all the waterways delivering a certain quality of water down to the ocean. Good news for us, there were a lot of policies already in place. There was a sense that there was not as much water in Southern California as there were, the population was growing, And the master plan was derived with already the ambition of multi-beneficial solutions to the channel, the concrete channel, which is already spoiling, but also a channel that was actually calculated in terms of width and depth for the population of 1929 or maybe 1935, but certainly not for where we are today, and certainly not where we are today for with the level of impermeability. Therefore, permeability becomes an important solution. So I don't have to tell you all that, of course, we have incredible jurisdictional complexities. In fact, the master plan we worked on only worked on the 32 miles within the city of Los Angeles because the supervisors and the council and mayor couldn't get on the same page necessarily. So therefore, we studied 32 miles, and here you see the 5 watersheds, of course, and sort of how we strategized. And I don't have to tell all of you how complex it all is. You know, we have government and county, state, federal agencies, local agencies, organizations which are really becoming much stronger and well equipped to sort of advocate and become involved with all these issues. And a series of projects that are associated with the river revitalization plan that I will be sharing with you. So we, of course, understood that we needed to understand not only the river, but the open space, and then sort of this urban network. And that what we needed to do was to revitalize the river, capture community opportunities, green neighborhoods, and really understand the value of densification in the future. So this restoring of these ecosystems and enhancing water quality and flood storage will, of course, very much the part of the mission and the goals of the plan. We understand that in order to create in these environments a sense of resilience, that of course we can't go back to the original sort of what this waterway might have done in this valley, but instead we have to come up with engineering solutions that allow for additional water storage, but also wetlands and along the edges of the river that actually help clean the water as it gets down into the waterway. We produced about 80 different sort of typologies associated with the Rio Overlay District, which is still in the planning department and not yet approved 2 years into it. But we created a plan that actually produced about 800 projects. So a menu of projects of many different scales that the policymakers in the river office within the planning department and within the Bureau of Engineering could actually start working through. And of course, many of you have seen these images, and again, that is the power we bring to the table, is trying to visualize what these solutions might look like, and therefore help the community understand and the elected officials understand what the potential is of this new sort of form of adaptations and resilience. In the more industrial area, integrating ourselves into also the existing infrastructure, everything doesn't have to be redesigned. And here is a project, the LA Zoo, associated with the river, but part of the Proposition O, where you take a large parking lot and actually do permeable paving and these sort of ways of really cleaning the water before they get into the river. This is from a rail yard to a park, an old rail yard where we actually bring the water out from the regular stormwater system, put it through this park, and then and this wetland, and then put it back in cleaner, of course, than what we found it. Again, Prop O project with a team, a project that's really well received by the community, incredibly well used. Again, education becoming a really important part of this process. It's right across the street from a high school and a whole new redevelopment area of sort of affordable housing. And then right across the street from us, the Natural History Museum decides to actually open itself up to the world, and instead of being a mothballed institution that really understands dinosaurs and other things, that really tries to understand nature in the city. And we worked through this idea of an urban ecological laboratory, 5 acres. Again, actually, they did get Prop 84 funding to the tune of actually $9 million to actually implement this project. Here you see the beginning of our river and the end of our river. It's a story of how do you really bring all these ideas and educational strategies of taking care of water and the environment and urban ecology and how people live in the city through fences and walls and and fountains and in such a way that people, especially in Southern California, who live their gardens, and those who don't, what the opportunities for those are. So here you see understanding everything from composting to how to use sort of materials like rebar in an interesting way, or stone, and this happens to be the stone that actually comes from the area in Montana where the bones are at across the way. Of course, this garden opened just as the metro, the Expo line was starting to open. So it really is about the future. So I think what I want to impart on all of us, and perhaps you're all the converted already, is that this sort of new aesthetic, a new way of really looking at the city is something that we can all live and enjoy. This happens to be the emergency water supply for Los Angeles, 6 months of water supply in a big event, MWD in Hemet. And it's a museum, again, deploying all the same and similar strategies, allowing for stormwater and sort of the experience and the parking lots and everything else to actually really take into account all the issues that have been described earlier. Again, education. A few projects that we're involved with right now. One is the recalibration of this reservoir, which is no longer going to be one of the 13 drinking water reservoirs for the city of Los Angeles. Now has the opportunity of being recalibrated and going from a single purpose of drinking water into a multi-purpose public space. And especially given the interest of some of the members of the of your board, the possibility that this could be storage for reclaimed water for a big area of the city. Now it's drinking water for South Central Los Angeles. It's not like South Central won't have drinking water. By the way, it's just being moved elsewhere. And it's complicated. But here it is. You could see, basically the right in here, you could see the lake. There's the river. The actual reservoir, the water is getting moved right in here, and there's a connection of pipes already existing between the river, the reservoir, the river, and also Echo Park and Bayona Creek. So just saying, the infrastructure is there to be kind of reconceptualized. I happen to have a pet peeve about golf courses given this dialogue, so I thought it would be interesting to share. We did win an award for this, sort of a series of solutions for Los Angeles associated with urban agriculture, and we think that this happens to be a publicly owned golf course right across from the Glendale Reclamation Plant. Therefore, we could use reclaimed water and produce food for about 20,000 people. And get a lot of golfers really upset about it. But that is still only 1.4% of the population of LA County actually plays golf. So maybe that's okay. And finally, one of these projects that we took on as a firm that has become kind of a real project. This is a UP facility in the middle of the city, along the river and across from Union Station, and it's 125 acres, and it has the possibility of really allowing us to really create a river district where all the ideas that are part of the master plan could be implemented. We bring the water, we bring it into the site, we slow it down, we do everything with water. The notion of really creating this district, an urban village. USC, of course, now has its medical center over here, and of course Union Station is going through a big sort of master plan effort, and it will be growing tremendously. So this happens to be a site that has tremendous potential, and there is a lot of conversation about the future of this project in the imminent future. And again, you know, everything from stormwater management events. It also is important to say that there is a flood map, a federal new flood map that was issued in the last year, which actually shows that there are parts of the city on the east side that actually have, you know, a certain 100-year flood condition that would not be beneficial to a lot of trains, let's put it that way. So we need to address it somehow and sometime soon. So it gives us that, also the piggyback has been included in all the alternatives for the ecosystem restoration study from the Army Corps of Engineers. So again, deploying these site programming, habitat and other water quality projects within the site, and a catalyst for the area between east and west. And again, just going back, like here you see these sort of pink dots, the zoo, the golf course, the Natural History Museum, and the South LA wetland, all of these projects where basically we're taking advantage of, in a way, a lot of the policies that have been put in place, but we also help support those activities, and we hopefully bring them to life in a way that allows for buy-in and education in the future for these important sort of new strategies in terms of resilience. And we're going to persevere, I know, and continue to grow as a city and a region. Thank you.
The Riparian Preserve is a groundwater recharge facility that also serves many other community needs. It's in Gilbert, Arizona. Before I go on beyond this slide, I want to just kind of point out a few features. It is on about 140 acres, so a quarter section of land in Gilbert, Arizona. There is a canal that runs along the eastern edge of it, through which we can get water from either the Central Arizona Project or the Salt River Project, which are two different watersheds that serve this area. And so when surface water isn't being used for drinking water purposes through a treatment plant, it can be delivered at this facility for recharge into the ground. The other source of supply that comes to this facility is through a reclaimed water line or recycled water line that comes from a wastewater treatment plant about 3 miles away, and it all comes to a centralized distribution network where it can be spread out into these basins. Each one of these basins, there are 7 of them. They're about 9 acres each, and if you go out to the Riparian Preserve, you'll see them in different stages of fill or drying, because the water gets delivered, it soaks into the ground, percolates down through the upper layers of soil about 170 feet down to the aquifer, where that water is stored for a drought condition, or it is also stored for later use just under normal conditions. In this case, also at the site, there's an urban fishing lake, about 4.5 acres of urban fishing lake, that is actually filled with water that was once up here, percolates down, gets pulled back up through some shallow aquifer wells, and is used to fill that lake. And then that lake is used for the landscape irrigation, sustaining the needs of the landscape irrigation on site. So that's kind of just an overview of the facility. Gilbert is about 30 miles southeast of Phoenix. We are the town of Gilbert, but it's 220,000 people, so it's just a name, but it's a fairly large town in Gilbert. This is what the shape of Gilbert looks like. It's about 76 square miles in southeastern part of Maricopa County. And the Riparian Preserve is right there where that star is. And then that's what it looks like on those 140 acres. It's anchored by a library, a regional library that the town of Gilbert partnered with the county on. And then this 120 acres of open space is what is kind of the gem of the community there. And looking closer at that, I'll go through some more features of the facility. You can see the recharge ponds there. They're not always full of water, especially in the summertime, because reclaimed water demands for golf courses, parks, that kind of thing, take that water in the summertime. But then in the winter months, for the most part, is when these ponds are filled with water. You see the darker zones here. These are called survival zones. One thing that the town of Gilbert learned in its first recharge project, this is actually its second, one of the things that they learned is that when fish and turtles and amphibian life starts to show up, they kind of like to have water even when the basins aren't filled with water for percolation. So these are deep zones for survival for the fish and frogs and that type of thing. We also built in habitat islands so that like black and white stilts and avocets and that type of thing, we've learned that they like to be away from people, away from the trails. So we built these habitat islands out in the middle so that they could nest and be at peace there. There's an outdoor classroom. There's a couple of streams that go out throughout the facility. There's an ethnobotanical garden that shows people how indigenous peoples used plants of the Southwest for either dyes or clothing or shelter or that type of thing. So that's up here, kind of in the active play area. That's the ethnobotanical garden there. There's a children's play area with lots of organic types of play. There's no tot lot there, and I'll give you some pictures of all of this. In Arizona, you have to demonstrate in places like Gilbert, Arizona, you have to demonstrate a 100-year assured water supply. So you can't build another lot in Gilbert without showing to the state of Arizona that there's 100 years of supply. And so as the population grows, Gilbert has to, and any community in the Phoenix metropolitan area, has to continue to show that they've got the water to be able to do that under normal conditions as well as drought conditions. So in about 1999 is when this project was built, and you can see that Gilbert was adding about 1,000 people a month at the time to its city, which was pretty crazy growth rate. And along with that growth rate becomes wastewater. And so what to do with that wastewater? Gilbert doesn't have an LA River or a salt river to discharge to. They have to manage all of the wastewater on site. And so there's two ways to do that. One is through direct reuse through a purple pipe system. The rest is to capture what's remaining and put it in the ground. Thankfully, Gilbert has a regional aquifer that it can store the water in. Many cities don't have that luxury. So this just is a graph that shows that since 1999, when the project was built, it has stored over 18 billion gallons of water for future use. And I hope you can see, it's subtle in this, but there's a cumulative scale here that shows that we're at about 55,000 acre feet or 18 billion gallons of water that's been stored over the years. And then what happens is that water gets spread for that 100-year demonstration to the state. It gets spread over those 100 years. So when you look at this component here, which is the groundwater, actually this right here, this reclaimed water, that's basically reclaimed water and groundwater that has been stored underground. So we say that it's reclaimed water right here, but a lot of that is actually water that's been stored underground and gets spread over time for the community's needs. Does that, hopefully that makes sense. And so this is what makes Gilbert a drought-resilient city. We've got two surface water supplies, the Salt River and the Central Arizona Project. Those sources of supply get used for the drinking water processes, but whatever water they don't use for that need goes to these facilities. The Riparian Preserve is one of 3 recharge facilities in Gilbert. And that water gets percolated in the ground. And then whatever gets used, all of that reclaimed water also goes to the facility. So there's a lot of built-in resiliency and redundancy in the town's, both the potable water supply and the reclaimed water supply. So conjunctive water management provides resiliency to drought in Gilbert. The available surface water supplies are stored underground, as are the recycled water for credit. The reclaimed water is also exchanged. Anywhere in the town of Gilbert where the town is served by the Salt River Project, reclaimed water can be delivered to a park or a golf course, and in exchange the city can get an equal amount of river water back for drinking water purposes. So yeah, so that's those innovative regulations that allow for flexibility. Again, the groundwater is reserved for a drought day. They tend not to use the groundwater. They tend to wait to have to use it for that drought day instead of a rainy day. Again, the water treatment plants are served by 2 sources of supply. So 2 watersheds that are in kind of different climatic areas, the Colorado and the Salt Rivers, and the likelihood of having a drought on both of those is fairly low. So they get the benefit of that resiliency. And then there's another thing in Arizona called the Arizona Water Banking Authority. And what that's all about is making sure that Arizona takes all of its Colorado River water off the river, even if we're not using it all, so that it can all get banked into recharge projects throughout the state. And Gilbert participates in that as well. So that if there is a drought, we can turn wells on anywhere within the Central Arizona Project system, get that water into the canal and get it to the town of Gilbert. All right, now I'm going to just take you on a virtual tour of the facility. In addition to taking care of a lot of the water needs, it also embodies a lot of the kind of the vision statements that the town of Gilbert had in 1994, which is when this was planned. In terms of the town wanted to make sure that it preserved open space. They wanted to have lots of creative uses of water. They wanted to have lifelong learning opportunities. They wanted to preserve the agricultural heritage. Gilbert was a farming community. In fact, it was called the hay capital of the world during World War II. Most of the hay for all of the needs of the war came out of this area. And then they wanted to make sure that there's opportunities for recreation. So let me just take you on a tour of the ponds. This is what one of the ponds looks like when it's filled with water. And when it's filled, it's no deeper than 3 feet. We fill it up with water, allow it to percolate. The water soaks in at about a half a foot a day. It's just another view of one of them. In this case, in this picture, you can see an Eagle Scout project that was done where an Eagle Scout built basically a perch for raptors. And in this case, there's a great blue heron on the top of that perch on one of the habitat islands that was built. One of the survival zones is right around that island. And then you can see that the basin is actually dry right now in the rest of the basin. So it creates great habitat. When it's 115 degrees in Gilbert, it's a nice place to go to find a shady spot, whether you're a coyote or a human. So there's lots of places like this along the ponds. And the fact that the water is constantly fluctuating in terms of depth, it's very reflective of what happens in kind of the arroyos or the ephemeral washes throughout the Southwest, where we get these flooding and drying cycles. So you get this happens to be on the Pacific Flyway for birds. And so we get all kinds of migratory birds coming through here that don't normally live and stay in Arizona, but they come here and rest on their travels. We also have turtles everywhere. By the way, I took all of these pictures on Sunday as part of my bike ride. So I go out there all the time. I love this place. There's some egrets out there. Again, they're in the survival zone when one of the basins is not completely filled. Let me talk a little bit about the lake. We built this lake. Again, it's replenished with water that has been percolated through the soil and then pulled back up. And you can see it's 20 feet deep, and you can see from this aerial shot that you can actually see the bottom because it's fairly clean water. It's been filtered through the soil. We built in reefs to encourage habitat. So it's not just this big scooped hole in the ground. There's actually reefs along here and throughout the lake to provide natural habitat so that fish can replenish themselves and not have to be stocked all the time. There's a floating boardwalk. This is a hardscape around the lake. The rest of the facility just has gravel trails. This is the part of the children's play area that I was talking about. This is about a 100-foot long snake that's up on the top of a hill. That's a great place for kids to kind of discover what's going on. If you're a really observant kid, you'll find that there's a rat in the stomach of the snake down here in the concrete. So the next picture I'm going to show is I'm standing about right here looking toward the regional library that's over here. So that project, or that picture that I just showed, the aerial shot, was a year after it was established. This is just the other day. So you can see the vegetation has grown up. We're no longer irrigating the facility. It's all just natural. Whatever comes from the sky is taking care of this facility now. This is kind of along the lake edge by the library. Again, this is part of Arizona's Game and Fish's urban fishing program, so it is stocked with trout and bass and catfish. This is the floating boardwalk. One of the reasons we wanted to do this was to give people of all abilities the ability to move through a marsh habitat and not have to get in a boat to do that. So this is actually a pontoon floated boardwalk that goes across the water. And people with wheelchairs can go through there and see what's going on with coots and all kinds of things that are going on. This is just kind of the opposite side. So it's a great place for families to go. Anytime you go out there, it's just loaded up with people. I purposefully took pictures without people, but they were there. The trails, there's 4.5 miles of trails throughout the facility, throughout the 140-acre site. And I don't know if you can see them, but there's a couple of bunnies on that trail right there in the shade. Again, just opportunities for sitting, resting, reading, taking pictures of the wildlife, setting up your telescope. The trails are closed seasonally because, like I said, avocets and killdeer and black and white stilts and that type of thing like to just kind of plop their nests right in the gravel along the roads. So we do close those trails off, and we knew that going into it, and that was part of the design. to be able to close those trails off. Whenever you walk or bike or horseback ride through the facility, you're going to learn something. There's signs everywhere telling you what's going on, whether it's about the mountain ranges that are around there, the actual water cycle that's going on, or in this case, you can do a scan of the code right there and it'll tell you what's going on with this facility right here. So there's all kinds of opportunities for education as you're walking through there. It's kind of hard not to learn something when you're going through it. We purposefully designed a lot of opportunities for future things. So Eagle Scout projects, volunteer projects of any kind. We didn't design every square foot of this facility. We left openings for people who were part of the community to do things. In this case, an Eagle Scout did a compass course where you can go learn how to use a compass and have landmarks to go to. Again, a sign that talks about all of the different types of wildlife and migratory waterfowl that you'll see coming through there. One of the things we did was include signs. Well, there's actually 11 habitat zones in the 140 acres, and the habitat zones represent habitats that are throughout Arizona. And what happens is when you come across one of these signs, it'll tell you, like in this case, it says Sabino Canyon, Pima County, Coronado National Forest. That's where you will find the plants and animals that are in this zone in other places in Arizona. So if you're a visitor to Arizona and you're trying to figure out where you might also go, you can learn about a lot of Arizona right here. Some of the other elements, this is the ethnobotanical garden. This is that snake I was talking about. There's all kinds of things to learn at the playground. There's no tot lot. There's no horseshoe pit. It's all organic play, and it was done that way on purpose. We have a couple of special use areas where people can, it's basically a campground that goes out into the pond, and people can reserve that spot and basically have a weekend there if they want to. And there's a couple of people using one of those. There's lots of places for sort of impromptu learning and teaching, outdoor classrooms, that type of thing. How am I doing on time? Out of time. All right. I'm going to go to the end. These are just some of the, so what did it cost? This was the budget and the actual cost. So this is in $1999. But again, it's a 140 acre site with about $10 million of investment. It's providing water supply as well as many other amenities to the community.
Get right into it. So Chicago has 1,900 miles of alleys, and Baltimore has about 600 miles of alleys. And Los Angeles, it turns out, has 900 linear miles of alleys, comprised up of 12,309 individual segments. And you add those all up, and it gets you somewhere on the order of 1,998 acres. That's a lot of space, and this is the distribution of those that came out of this alleys project that we did a few years ago now with Josh Newell, who's now at the University of Michigan. And in the process of this, and in collaboration with a subcommittee of the City of Los Angeles Green Streets Committee, which was the Green Alleys Committee, we came up with and discussed many sort of opportunities for what you can do in these green alleys. And these are just concept plans that at the time were maybe on the edge of what's possible, but since then have been done more. So you can manage water, you can manage water quality, you can do permeable pavers, figure out, I mean, there's all sorts of concerns. Some of our alleys are full of trash that has to be cleaned up first, some of them are closed. But there's all sorts of great designs that you can do now to take this 2,000 acres of alley and do something that will contribute to making Los Angeles more drought resilient. And as we go on, these are sort of increasing in the amount of quote unquote green, the amount of vegetation that you would have, incorporating that into filtrating water. And we also went and did a study of the soils in the unpaved alleys across the city. There are actually a few of those, and discovered that there's a little bit of work to be done in cleaning them up, some remnants of the former land uses, like people changing their oil and just dumping it on the alley, and arsenic exceedances in a few places, probably from some past uses. And you can see how you would get into a situation where an alley that doesn't need regular access could actually be turned into a multiple use place to increase sort of sociality, play, transportation, walking, really a multi-benefit approach. Now, we're not the first people to think of this or to do it. The top two photographs there are from Chicago, looking at an alley that doesn't manage water very well, ends up with flooding during snowmelt, and the one on the right side is a 100% greened alley that takes that same situation and turns it into a better water management thing. Now, note the irony here. Green gets used in many different ways. Sometimes green means there's vegetation in nature, and sometimes green means we do something that we consider to be environmental, right? So that greened alley on the right, there's not a slick of green in it, right? I mean, but it is green in the sense that it's managing water better. And the photograph below is simply illustrating how you would, installing some permeable paving. And all this stuff works. This is a North Hollywood alley retrofit. The City of Los Angeles has a Green Streets Committee. The Green Alleys Committee sort of folded back into it. And there are literally dozens of projects that are either in process, on the books, seeking funding. And in fact, LA Moss has just recently done one of these Green Alley projects. They're out there, they're going, they work, and it's really kind of awesome. But the thing is, from my perspective, this is actually really sort of the easy, obvious stuff. We own these properties, by and large. We know we have to manage water quality. We know we have to infiltrate. And the idea that, I remember when Suzanne Dahlman published that stormwater resource not liability. Well, that's the mid-90s. You know, it's not like these are new ideas or new challenges that we're facing. We have to do this. This is obvious, and it's great that we are, and maybe not everybody knows it, but we need to be doing it more. And it sort of got me to thinking a little bit. And so alleys, interstitial spaces like that, this is the low-hanging fruit, right? How do we make this and transform the landscape of the city beyond that? Where are the big land uses? Well, single-family neighborhoods are, on average, 40% of the land area of urban Los Angeles. And one of our PhD students who are now professor worked on his dissertation, and he calculated the percent of tree and grass cover in residential neighborhoods in the 15 council districts of the city of Los Angeles plus the 20 largest cities. And found that on average, and so everybody's turning their heads sideways so they can see how their council district stacks up or their city stacks up. Obviously, this varies dramatically based on where you are in the city of Los Angeles. And I'm not parsing out grass and trees, and trees and shrubs are put in together, but this is actually a place where we have to perform better if Los Angeles County, the region, is going to be drought resilient. And so all the research indicates that trees are a good investment. Grass and sort of showy flowers that take a lot of water, not such a good investment. And so what's represented in here is both a wide variety of performance of the landscape in terms of tree cover, and also some really bad investments in terms of the types of landscaping that's going on. And I would argue to you that the alleys, let's keep doing it, find those little spaces, but between houses, these are actually interstitial spaces that we're losing now rather rapidly. Yesterday's LA Times. When you take a 4,000 square foot property in a single family neighborhood and you put a 5,000 square foot house on it, I know every person gets to have their castle and it's private property, and we're not supposed to say anything about what people do on their private property, but there's actually an enormous public cost to us becoming a drought resilient city if everybody is taking away the little spaces between their homes that could perform water infiltration, stormwater management, etc., and could also do, you know, good things for us. So they do stuff like this. And bit by bit, we've taken the spaces between the homes in the single-family neighborhoods. Oh, how about this? Let's just do the whole backyard, too, while we're at it, right? The MLS is a great source of information on this. People selling their houses like, here, let me show you my ugly backyard. But I would argue that sort of these two trends, mansionization, redeveloping of single-family neighborhoods, plus just the general LA trend towards paving the heck out of things, is actually undermining our ability across a much broader swath of the landscape than we might want to imagine. And what Sujin in his dissertation discovered is we aren't gaining tree cover in Los Angeles. The decade from 2000 to 2009, we in fact are losing tree cover quite dramatically, both with people who got permits and people who didn't get permits. So he looked at and did a sample out of all the cities of Los Angeles in the 15 council district and showed that over the decade from 2000 to 2009, for people who both had additional legal square footage on the right and people who had no additional legal square footage on the left, tree cover, the two things in gray are hardscape. It went up for all categories. The things on the right, grass and trees, we have a dramatic, and this isn't a percent change, this is percentage points out of 100. So we have this rather dramatic decrease in tree and cover and grass cover, and I'm not going to argue so much about that, but the problem is it's becoming hardscape and not becoming green infrastructure that can help us manage and be resilient in the face of a drought. And so let that sink in for a minute. That's happening on 40% of the land area of the LA basin by individual decisions by individual property owners who decided that they wanted to have an extra bit of patio that was paved, extra outbuilding that they weren't going to get a permit for. That's why there's increased numbers there on the left. That's all unpermitted development. And we're actually putting ourselves in a sort of a sad. Now, what do you do about this? I would argue that you need a different motivator. Loving nature takes people in a completely different direction. These are some numbers from a student research project going on right now under my supervision on the people who have certified wildlife habitats in the state of California. We sampled 135 certified wildlife habitats and the property across the street from them, all across California. And what do we find? Lo and behold, people who have certified wildlife habitats have 10 percentage points greater tree and shrub cover than people who don't. Now, I don't have cause and effect. I don't know that because they chose to be a certified wildlife habitat, they chose to put the trees in and that increased the tree cover. But what I do know is that they at least keep it. And why is this? What's the motivation? Why is it? I would argue, based on research that's come out, that people who look at these things, so here's a certified wildlife habitat in Lawndale, as a matter of fact, ironically. Of course, the city of Lawndale came after them and tried to get them to rip it out because they thought it was violating their weed ordinance. You know, pretty awesome. They watered this certified wildlife habitat once a year, 4th of July, for obvious reasons. And I think that that's the direction we want people to be going if we're going to have a landscape, an urban landscape that's drought resilient. And how do you get people there? It's not by beating them over the head and telling them there's a drought and they need to do something about it. Fear is not going to motivate people. And so I want to show you a slide here that comes out of a think tank in the UK called Futera, talking about messaging. It was about biodiversity. Same complete thing applies here. Fear, loss, all that stuff. The rainforest is going down. We don't have enough water. Climate is changing. Oh, doesn't motivate people to do things. It motivates them to shut down because they think it's helpless and hopeless and there's nothing they can do about it. It does not fear. I know fear can motivate people to vote, but fear in general doesn't motivate people to take positive action. The message has to be love. And now the question is it going to be love of dry? Or can it be love of nature? And I think love of nature and wildlife is the much better message. If we build this not about, oh, we're scared of it being too dry, but we can have diverse wildlife in our neighborhoods by using these plants that also happen to be incredibly tuned to the amount of rainfall we get in this area, we will both motivate action and make change at the kind of scale that we need to have it make a difference. So how do people do this? This is a project coming out of Los Angeles Audubon's Baldwin Hills Greenhouse program. It was a comic book called Kill Your Lawn, done by high schoolers in 2011. Why would you kill your lawn? Now, of course, killing things, that's sort of a negative message, but it takes the idea that there's something that you love, birds, butterflies, and there's an action coupled with it. Love plus action is public change. The economic stuff, that's for the policymakers. We got to make economic arguments for the policymakers, right? They're jaded to the love argument, right? But the public, it has to be love plus action makes public change. And so why would you do native plants? It's beautiful. High school kids can love it too. How do you go about killing your lawn? Look at that. You can get beautiful birds and whatnot and care for things with a little bit of water and get poppies and bumblebees and things that you can actually hold on to. It's a much, much better message to make the kind of systematic landscape change that we need than, oh my goodness, things are horrible. Now, what are the barriers to doing this? First, there's a huge capacity barrier. Not everybody knows where they could go get the plants that they could put in their yard. No one knows how to, this comic book, how many people has it reached? A couple thousand maybe? We have millions of people who need to learn how to kill their lawn and change it into something else. And so I think capacity, we need groups like these hundreds of times over. We don't need one Theodore Payne Foundation in the whole Los Angeles basin. It needs to be in everywhere there's a hardware store. It needs to have the tools. The tree peoples, the Conservation Corps, Council of Watershed Health, who are all working on these issues. We just have a capacity issue. We need more, so that people who can be motivated by this idea of living within their climate to have wildlife and birds and butterflies and whatnot know how to do this. When we went to do a restoration of the bluffs down in Redondo Beach, we had to start here. We had to build a nursery, then get the seeds, then grow the plants that would have been native to that area, and then put it out on the beach, right? A capacity issue. Now, for now, some politicians will lead on this, even if the public doesn't. When we tried to do this project here, there's some beautiful exotic ice plant, what I like to call ecological styrofoam. It's basically good for nothing, right? All the insects in South Africa love it. But nothing here is really eating it. And we had to go to the city of Redondo Beach. There was a councilman there, real estate guy, actually, rather conservative. And his constituents were saying, we want rose bushes here between the parking lot and the beach. And he was willing at this point to stand up and say, no, it's okay. We're going to do this thing. And we're going to take this and we're going to let them put natives in there. And it can look like something like that. So at the one stage, politicians do have to lead, and the public maybe isn't there yet. So this is what we did to that hill of ice plant. And this is Manhattan Beach deciding, hey, we'd like to do some native plants. Could you put some native plants in by our recreation area? Sure. Capacity, again. This looked great here, and in about 2 months, the maintenance people came through and cut down 2/3 of it because they didn't know and understand. Huge capacity issues in terms of knowing how to take care of these things, but if we can get through it, it will work. But the real change, I would say, is going to take a generation or more. So these are some kids at Leo Politi Elementary School. Basically one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. Los Angeles Audubon got a grant to go in and build a schoolyard habitat. They're standing in front of part of it right now. They're actually giving me a tour during their conservation art show, which happens every year about this time. One's on Friday. And proudly telling me about their native plants and what comes to them. And this is spread. This is Walgrove over on the west side. Building a landscape that manages water, that gets kids out and in tune with what this climate is that we live in. It's not a desert, it's a Mediterranean climate, it's very variable. Things grow, they grow in seasons. It's really incredible. And then what happens? Birds show up. This is from a wildlife camp. This is basically Vermont and Olympic. And there's a flicker there on a schoolyard habitat, showing it. Who would ever imagine that you would see a flicker like that in the middle of the city? But there it is. And warblers come through on migration. And so what do we end up with? This is the generational change. This is Francisco. He's a third grader. He is so into birds that he's got himself his own Sibley notebook. Sibley's a bird guide, that he's writing things in on his own time, writing himself a little biography of John Audubon, and, you know, and standing in front of a landscape that is what this city has to look like if it's going to be drought resilient. And he's not doing it because he's afraid it's going to be dry. He's doing it, and he's keyed into and will understand how to take care of and appreciate and install that landscape because he loves what's there, because that opportunity has been afforded. So I think if we're going to envision a future, it's got to be one that's based on love. It's got to be one that's based on bringing native plants back and the capacity to bring native plants back, and to hook people into this as a place of authenticity and nature, and not one that's just all artifice. We'll still have that, of course. But I think there's an opportunity here. Thank you.
One of the themes that I had not planned on is how fast things are changing. The speakers talked about, and you actually saw in one of the presentations, DWP's plan for future water. It was made in 2010. This is like an evolving stroke. Things are changing day to day. So whatever you heard of was fact in Los Angeles, even a year ago, is no longer. My goals today are to help us understand that a new, resilient local water supply is not only possible, it's now beginning to happen, even at DWP and at LA County Public Works Flood Control and at LA City Sanitation. It's actually starting to happen. I want to get into how trees and land used to capture, clean, and hold water, and how we lose it, so we understand the fundamentals that actually many of the speakers, and Travis especially, hit on why we need permeable living soil. How we can biomimic those functions to actually create a very resilient city without having to unpave everything, unpaving as much as we can. How that's happening, how they did it rapidly in Australia, dealing with the kinds of issues that are coming straight at us very fast, and how we can do it here. So that's where I'm going. I want to acknowledge, as a nonprofit doing this work, a bunch of sponsors and partners that make this work possible. Our 10,000 members and our 15,000 volunteers, and some of the volunteers work for Boeing, and they got Boeing to give us the money to study Australia and bring that data here. The California Water Foundation and the Conservation Fund have been enabling tree people to survive and focus on this. Are unbelievable partners in this time of change. The Department of Water and Power, LA County Flood Control, City Sanitation, but NGOs like the Council for Watershed Health, NRDC, Heal the Bay, others who we've been working very, very closely with. The way it was, the way it is, our native, lovely big tree, coast live oak. How this natural infrastructure works that we probably forgot and need to remember, and also why Tree People is giving this presentation. So that last coast live oak was a very large oak tree. The canopy was 100 feet in diameter. So what happens underneath is what's really important. Over several hundred years, the soil was built, and it created incredible space that is habitat. Most oaks have at least 300 species of critter, bugs to small to microorganisms living in the tree and especially in the soil. Together, they are an ecosystem that does a whole lot of stuff that is our life support system. So that space under a tree, I'm stealing my next, or setting up my next speaker's talk. That space is not just habitat, and filled with life. It is a sponge. It is a tank, as is the canopy. A sponge, it captures the first 1/10 of an inch of rainfall without ever releasing it. But then it releases it, not just down the trunk, by the way, but it slows, catches the rain, drops it in. Water flowing across the surface flows into that space. So, and it picks up pollutants. The critters work together to clean it. Now, and then because it's really permeable, that water goes down to the aquifer. The volume of that space going back is what's significant. According to the U.S. Forest Service, with a tree 100 feet in diameter, that space 5 feet deep, the volume, the liquid volume of storm, it has the capacity to hold 57,000 gallons in a 12-inch flash flood without releasing it, without it running downstream as a flood. 57,000 gallons. So the question is, what happens when we lose the tree? And what we replace it with. It does stormwater capture, tank, flood control, all kinds of things, water quality. When we lose the tree, we lose all those services, we lose the water, we lose the habitat, and we potentially lose our lives in a drought. So what we replaced it with was hardscape, a bureaucracy of a flood control system, a water supply system, all these different bureaucracies that never talk to each other again like the tree talked to itself. And we created separate infrastructure systems that all cost, many of them conflicting, duplicating surfaces, making it, delivering us to the point where we have very expensive infrastructure that is very vulnerable right now, and a public unwilling to pay what it takes and unable to pay what it takes to get it up to shape to protect us from the coming severe weather that you can read all about in today's times. So Australia experienced, all climate scientists from across the world pointed to Australia as one of the early victims of severe weather and climate change. From drought, all the things that we know, hotter hots, wetter wets, drier dries. They just came through a 12-year historic drought. It finished about 2.5 years ago. When that happened, they were out of water. And they're a fairly dry place anyhow. But they biomimicked the tree, and they got people to change. People had to change radically. And what I'm telling this story is because it speaks a story that we could emulate fairly quickly. So I happened to marry an Australian, and well, before the drought, I saw them harvesting rainwater out in the countryside, and they took an old tradition and brought it into the city. During the drought, I saw all kinds of changes happening. Most of the homes had signs like this. And for those of you who haven't been in Australia, you know, the cities don't look any different than ours. In fact, most of them are better. But on condos, on homes, everybody who had a landscape captured rainwater, was proud of it, needed to because they got social pressure to not have it. They installed tanks galore. Millions and millions were blown out, heavily discounted, so it was easy for people to get. This is about a 1,000-gallon one, the minimum size installed. They had 1,000, 5,000, up to 20,000 gallons per house. This is their version of Home Depot. There was an online center where you could size your roof, size your tank, get your rebate from your water district, pick up your installer, get them installed. So that now 45% of the homes in the city of Adelaide that has the weather most identical to us, 45% of the homes now have cisterns. Brisbane, 30%. Sydney, 30%. You can't build or renovate a house or make a change without being required to put in a major cistern as part of your water supply. What happened during that drought is a city like Brisbane, water use started at 83 gallons per person per day. It dropped to 33. Hasn't returned beyond 40 gallons per day. They more than doubled or tripled their water supply, first of all by capturing the rain and than by radically conserving. What happened with the behavior change by enabling people to do this is they became managers of the water. They had their own rainwater bank account. And when you got your cash in your hands, visible, you spend it very, very different. When you think it is your life support system, you spend it different. And that's exactly what happened. That's how they made it through. 10.5 years into the drought, they started building desal plants when they got scared. By the time the drought was over, none were finished. A year afterwards, as they started coming online, like Sydney's plant came online, produced abundant water. They couldn't sell a drop of it. It was mothballed and sold. We want to talk about drought resilience and a fast response. This is feasible. So Travis hit it. We need a lot more than Tree People. Tree People has committed itself to helping facilitate, catalyzing a rapid shift to local water supply and climate resilience in Los Angeles. We've set a goal of 50% local water. We believe at least 30% can be done very, very quickly with rainwater, but all the things that you have heard about today and will hear about, groundwater recharge, recycling with local water, we can hit that. Santa Monica has a goal of 100% local water by 2020. Tree People, NRDC, Hilda Bay are working with them to help them get there. Today, we're holding workshops training people how to do the things Travis talked about, to have more and more people fall in love and unpave their yards and their neighborhoods. We need a lot of policy support to take it to scale. But just this year, Tree People working with DWP got MWD to give a $75 per barrel, rain barrel rebate. So you can now, as of now, get rain barrels for $10 a piece. But those are thimbles. They're good starter drugs for rainwater harvesting. Here's an example of an Australian design tank that we're installing in a school called a Bushman. Here's a crazy neighbor of mine who gathered all the 300-gallon barrels he could. He's got 5,000 gallons of storage, not elegantly. Here's what could, well, but he's doing it. You know, he's got abundant water. And he's a German guy, but he knows where he lives, and he wants security, and he wants to grow his food, and he never runs out. Let me say, what's probably in your question in your mind is, but it doesn't rain here, right? But it does rain here. Last year, the driest year in calendar history. Driest calendar year in history. It still rained 3.6 inches. Los Angeles today, and we're using, LA City uses two numbers. One in the integrated resource plan for water, the metrics that we calculated shows that we throw away 3.6 billion gallons per inch. But sanitation is saying now that it's actually, that was a half-inch number. They say we throw away 7.6 billion gallons per inch of rainfall. So whether you go on the low end, last year we threw away roughly 12 billion gallons of water. Or last month when it rained 4 inches in 1 week, that storm, we threw away either 13 billion gallons of water or 26 billion. We threw away either 3,500 gallons per person for every one of the 4 million people, or 7,000 gallons per person. Either way you look at it, on the driest year in recorded history, we had a lot of water that we could have captured if we build a system like this. So we can manufacture fences like this that go in between houses. We can manufacture it right in the green zone. This fence holds 5,000 gallons per fence line, 100 feet long, made of recycled plastic. I happened to invent this one, but we could do others, and LA's design community could do better, I am sure. DWP would like to see us get these manufactured locally. Here's a 216,000 gallon cistern right in Tree People's headquarters at dead center, the heart of Los Angeles, at Coldwater and Mulholland. In that last rainstorm, it captured 81,000 gallons of water. Here's the Sun Valley Watershed streets reworked to mimic the natural watershed. And you need to go online and see the videos to see how these work. But the rainwater is harvested from the street, goes through an engineered treatment wetland, and so the street starts to function like the creek that it used to be. Project of the Council for Watershed Health, Tree People City of Los Angeles, all kinds of agencies to show that this is possible. LA is about to spend $4.5 billion to replace our roads. Our roads aren't just roads. They are our drought enforcement system, our pollution inoculation system, our non-resilience dependency system. If we're going to spend $4.5 billion repaving, we better do this. And if we put up that money and the money that we need to spend for water quality, for water supply, for flood protection, we've got over $20 billion that the city and the county will spend in the next 10 years. That could be quite a match to attract federal funds to help get us all the way there. We have retrofitted schoolyards, so they go from this, you ask for good pictures, from this, with kids helping design it once they learn basic watershed thinking, to put in filter systems that did what happened under the tree, and tree roots. This is 40 feet under the schoolyard. It used to look like that. It now looks like that. That is in the San Fernando Valley. It's now part of the city's water supply, flood control, water quality treatment system. This is in Pacoima. It's happened in several schools. The school district is part of a collaboration with the city and the county and us to try to get this to be able to happen again. The infrastructure agencies want to give the money to the district. The district is kind of allergic to it. They don't want kids exposed to potential problems with contaminated water underneath the school. We're working on it. The breakthrough is possible. I want to bring you to one last piece. This is also from Australia, a relevant solution to a problem that most of you haven't heard about yet, but if you've been traveling around the city, especially in the unirrigated lands and in parks that have been conserving water well, you will know that trees are dying all over town. Parks Department called us because they were in big trouble in February before the rains hit and asked for help. We pulled in this solution from Australia where they deployed these traffic barriers by the tens of thousands filled with recycled water, hooked up to drip irrigation systems and deployed around their trees that were 120 years old that they couldn't afford to lose. I showed this system to Betty White, a donor of ours, and she gave us the funds to get started with the pilot project. And the heroics in our city is city sanitation makes reclaimed water. We called them. They said, yeah, you can have the water from us, but you're going to need to talk to the regional board and county health department to get permission to do it. And DWP owns the water, so they got to say yes. Good luck. And called DWP. They said, yes, you can have the water, but you got to talk to the regulators. We talked to the regional board. One of the board members, and I'll remember her name before this paragraph is out, said, we're going to do all we can, but it really is in the hands of County Public Health. And County Public Health, we talked to, and they said, yes, you can do this. This is too important. Madeline Glickfeld, thank you. And so we got permission within about 90 minutes for that whole thing to happen. And we've got, the pilot was built and tested, monitored by Public Health, and these things are starting to go into parks this week or next around LA. We're hoping we can pilot it there and go for a federal disaster assistance response. But we've got reclaimed water going in to protect critical canopy. Can't do it for enough of all of LA, but the vision of how do we deploy, it is possible. So I just want to conclude, I don't want to conclude, but I will conclude, with the fact that what's happened, those of you who have heard me speak over the last 20 years, we needed to demonstrate that this was technically, economically, and socially feasible. People will do this. People want to do this. Technically, we know it works. The economically was the challenge. When the trees stopped doing all that integrated and we broke into separate agencies, doing integrated sustainable water became not economically feasible unless we got the agencies to come back together. I can tell you today that now, sitting at the table together is DWP, city sanitation, county public works, flood control, starting to plan together how they could do this. It's now within reach. I'm not saying it's done, But within a few weeks ago, I won't quote the individual, but they, having gotten through the hump of being able to get the agencies to see that they're all on one team. They may be the offensive squad and the defensive squad with different names, but they have to cooperate, combine their budgets. They are getting there to do that. And one of the key leaders said, distributed, smart, networked cisterns and large capture systems is the fastest, cheapest, best way to go to get us water as soon as possible. I believe if we reach out to the feds with a shout out from the governor, and by the way, those cisterns that I showed you can be electronically networked, so we actually have the nation's or the world's smart water grid. The technology exists today. So we actually have a fully integrated system that gives us water for habitat, that gives us flood protection, that gives us water supply, that even does first flush of the whole stormwater system before a storm to clean it so we meet the MS4 law. All of that is feasible. It's going to take leadership. The leadership is emerging. Thank you for your support in getting there. We may need you to write letters and come to the table with your voices. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Some of you in the room have probably seen this presentation and this work before. I will be brief. I'm going to talk about what we've done, and Hadley's going to talk about where we're going. I do want to acknowledge the excellent work that's been shown here today, and also some of the case study and precedent studies, the Council for Watershed Health, Dr. Steele's work on the groundwater augmentation study, the Bureau of Reclamation, the GWAM model that deeply influenced this work. We all know that water is changing, and the central premise behind this is that the idea that the natural systems are actually now starting to fluctuate outside of normal bounds. Where this is going, specifically with this work, is that not only are natural systems now the probability of those systems are now exceeding likely thresholds. The planning tools that have been used in the last 50 years are, we would claim, are now outdated to properly assess both the vulnerabilities and the probabilities of how natural systems and human systems need to change. So the idea is that we need to design for variability. This is a case study assessment looking at how to strategically identify stormwater resources in the San Fernando Valley. It's simply called Where Is It? Let's Reuse It. It's a geospatial modeling framework to help agencies and municipalities kind of come together over strategic reassessment. The area is a 200 square mile urbanized basin, the San Fernando Valley. You'd think that it's fairly monochromatic in its density. However, the analysis has kind of looked into kind of probing and trying to identify strategic opportunities to infiltrate, to detain, to treat around the valley. And the results may be somewhat surprising to you. How do we do this? I'm not going to go into the specifics, but there are three coupled models. There's a runoff model, there's an infiltration model, and then there's a kind of constraint or fuzzy logic model that looks at how the coupling between the natural and human systems work. The first component is the runoff model. So what you're seeing is in the bright yellow areas are areas where there is high volumes of stormwater being produced based essentially on the impermeability or the permeability or the impermeability of the land surface. So highly impermeable, highly impervious areas are generating more stormwater per unit area than areas that are highly permeable. Black areas are permeable. This model is essentially showing us, using a 30-year precipitation normal, what this valley is generating potentially on a yearly basis. Our model is coming up with approximately 90,000 acre feet of stormwater runoff. That's literally just sheeting off the land surface. That's not shallow, deep infiltration or transevaporated back in the atmosphere. That's simply water treated as waste. The second component of the model is the kind of subsurface, superficial geology. So what you're seeing is a kind of peek back into pre-development era. The areas in yellow are highly permeable. They're at least on the eastern side of the San Fernando Valley, those are areas where the natural drainage royal channels previously were. So soil conditions and the soil matrices are very open, and they're large, they're younger in a sense. The areas that are kind of tan are somewhat suitable for infiltration, and then as the color spectrum starts to go to the gray or black areas are areas that you absolutely want to avoid. Gray areas are less suitable for groundwater infiltration. This third piece of this model is the constraint model, and what is somewhat possibly obvious, wasn't obvious to us, is that the idea of groundwater contamination is really not an issue that has historical precedent, as we see in the eastern side of the San Fernando Valley, the Superfund site, but it's actually an ongoing issue, and this is data that has been culled from the California Resource Control Board's GeoTracker sites as of spring 2013. So these are active areas where there's known contaminant in the soil, there's active spills, there's remediation efforts going on, and such. So when you couple all these three things together, what you do is you get this resultant analysis. And this is kind of, what we're seeing here is what the valley, the coupled natural and human system, is doing at a large urban scale. Areas that are dark or black are really not suitable for direct groundwater infiltration. Areas that are yellow are highly suitable, and then you get the kind of the spectrum of suitability between those two things. If you were to then look at what's the best way to manage resources given small amounts of money, this map is what we call the Marshall Plan for Stormwater. It's a assessment saying where are resources best spent, small amounts of resources in which subwatersheds to do which infrastructural function. That model is coupled, although it's being presented at a fairly large scale, the resolution of the data is down to 30 meter resolution. And the model has the ability to assess best management practices using LA counties and US EPA's BMPs. So what happens is the model can, like for instance, dry ponds, infiltration basins, urban forests, dry wells and cisterns. And this is a different kind of drawing of that same model. On the right, what you see is 3 case study subwatersheds, and they're colored different because the model, what it's doing is it's pulling out BMPs, and it's saying BMPs, based on how the model is working, should be directed in these subwatersheds. The tool has been prototyped to be accessible to the public. It's ported to ArcGIS.
That one appears to be quite fuzzy in a way, maybe so much detail that it's not actionable. But if you were to drill down into the level of parcel by parcel, property by property, you'd actually get very, very specific information, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. The next slide, that slide, in a way generalizes that information. You could say it kind of loses some detail, but what's important, I think, about this layer is that it gives actionable planning strategies within subwatershed districts. So it gives you a characterization of what is the predominant hydrologic function you're going to want in certain subwatersheds. Then you can actually start to use within those districts the spectrum or the variation of possible responses within it. So it both gives a kind of planning level set of data and a design level, a development level specific to parcels. I think that is important from where we come from for a few reasons. Defining Los Angeles, dryland city design for the next 100 years, where do we want to go with this model? We see the model actually as a tool. We're actually calling it hazel, which is the traditional wood for divining where are hidden water sources and where would we act in order to have access to them. We recognize that hazel is an instrument in some cultures considered to be an instrument of wisdom and inspiration, but also sort of mystery. We're not really sure where this is going to take us in terms of urban and built form. Really important message from the model is infiltrate everywhere is not the advisable strategy for City of Los Angeles. Infiltrating very, very strategically and tactically. There are zones that will be about infiltration. There will be zones that will be about retention, about being distributed to other zones that are more appropriate. But I think also what's really important, and I think to go back to words that Hilda used when she opened the afternoon, talking about the importance of the imagination, and Travis's talk of the importance of love. What I want to claim here is one surface of the city that we haven't talked too much about today. We've talked a lot about the land itself and land-based strategies. A lot of the city is built out. I want to say I love cities. I love history and I love architecture. Cities throughout history have produced public architectures that handle water well. We've forgotten and we have erased and we've moved away from some of those fantastic public architectures and building systems that define roofs, walls, the experience of street, the walk to school, the building itself. Divining LA will complement, without a doubt, some of the incredible land-based work that's going on both in the public sector and NGOs and in the private sector. We hope it will also get us up off the curb, off the landscape itself, and start to look at building systems, the way we actually build roofs, build all that 85% impermeable urban environment. Architects in Los Angeles have for probably over 100 years known that to build here means to handle seismic activity. We built it into how we educate architects, how we license them, how we practice. It is distinctive. And what's arisen out of that is a beautiful set of architectural and urban moves where designers recognizing the specific requirements of this place mean we have to use concrete and wood and glass and steel in ways that are different from Philadelphia or Providence or Cleveland or London. We think that if we say actual particular hydrologic functions of capture, retain, treat, distribute, will produce roof packages, wall packages that are elegant. Your neighbor 50 years from now, those won't be canisters stacked like beer cans next to the house. Those will actually be built into systems that are required, that we're trained and prepared to implement. So that's a farther horizon perhaps than some of the really rapid change that you're looking at, but we think that the architecture of the built environment is a big piece of this puzzle. Divining LA will allow us to take the tool, Hazel, put it into the hands of the schools and the profession, test it, give us feedback, and we hope produce planning guidelines, building code guidelines, and new designs of building systems and building typologies. So that's where we're going with this, and we are delighted to have some great partners in Tree People and the AIA and Bureau of Engineering and County Flood Control and a network of others working with us on that. So thank you very much.
Again, just in 5 minutes, there's not a whole lot I can add to what the excellent speakers have already said. We've heard this quote from UN Water, I think has been a theme throughout what everyone's been saying. Well, I shouldn't say, we haven't really talked about climate change directly, so maybe I'll bring that in, that water is the primary medium through which climate change influences the Earth's ecosystems, and therefore people's livelihoods and well-being. So it is the primary medium. It's not just something that we like to talk about. It's the primary medium through which it will affect people's lives. In listening to the way people have been presenting, I kind of put it into a frame, which I'll just really briefly run through, which is design thinking. And Peter, you brought that up when you talked about design for variability. This concept that we're going to reframe our problems, generate solutions, and then build prototypes or develop prototypes or demonstrations, learn from those prototypes, and then feed that information back to improve on the solutions. Maria, I'm going to use another quote, this one from Kofi Annan. It's impossible to devise effective environmental policy unless it is based on sound scientific information. And I think what the Water Board is doing, what you talked about, again, embodies that. So just, I think Travis, starting out with the recognized state where we're empathizing with people. What is the value that they're bringing, that we need to bring to them? Love, obviously, is one of those needs. And what Travis was talking about with interstitial greening. Also, what the City of Gilbert has done through seeing how they can meet the future water needs for 100 years. And also, Guy, you didn't talk about it that much, but when I talked to Mark Horn, he said that you spent a year listening to the public to develop the Riparian Institute, to develop that preserve before you began building it. So trying to understand what the values are. We sometimes forget in our race, our snail's pace race, to take concrete out of the LA River, that the current gray infrastructure was built for a reason. And again, Peter and Hadley, you were talking about the what we call gray infrastructure. Cities are built in a certain way, and you've made me think of it a little bit differently. I was thinking mainly in terms of the river when I wrote that. The flood control channel that is the river was built to protect life and property. The problems it was designed to address have not gone away. Just like seismic activity, the way we build our buildings, that has not gone away. And so we need to look for those leaders, perhaps in some places we haven't looked before. And we also need to recognize that our flood control managers are actually, in fact, in Los Angeles, in Riverside, in Ventura, and the surrounding counties. They are some of our greatest leaders in thinking about how do we design, how do we change, how do we transform to maintain those vital values of protecting life and property, and at the same time integrate those other values of nature and ecosystem services. Another couple of things I wanted to bring to you, this concept that when we research, when we generate a series of or a range of possible solutions, like what Andy's talking about, what Tree People has been doing for 40 years, what's happening at the universities, what happens at nonprofits, generating a series of solutions. There's not one solution necessarily. There's a menu of solutions we want to talk about and we want to educate people about. We want to bring that element of nature back in. And then that third step of relating, prototyping, demonstrating, communicating, and learning. So when we build these things, we need to learn from them. It's really one of the things that frustrates me, and I'll just, well, I won't end with frustration. I'll try not to end with frustration. I'll give you another good quote. But one of the, yes, love. One of the things that I love is when we install green infrastructure, we need to learn from it. We need to figure out if it's working and then tell everybody about it. It really doesn't do any good if a green infrastructure project fails and we cover it up. We need to know that we need to build failure, the possibility for failure into the system, and we need to tell people about that just as much as we tell them about successes. And we can use that information then to design new things. The Elmer Avenue project that Andy showed a slide from with the Council for Watershed Health, the Tree People, Bureau of Reclamation, City of LA, County of LA, MWD, Water Replenishment District, I've left a few off, all came together to build. A year into that, we found some problems. We found that it hadn't been designed properly in a few cases, and we used that information in two ways. We used that to improve on our design for the Paseo, the green alley to the south of it, and also we got some Prop O money from the city and the city created a whole new project to double the amount of water that goes into the ground from Elmer Avenue. So we used the research to improve, and we didn't cover it up. That's bad. You don't want to cover these things up. You want to talk about it. So I'm going to turn it over to Krista. I'll just give you one more quote, which gets to this issue of sustainability. We've been talking about resilience, but what is sustainability? And this is from Dr. Priya, I'm going to mispronounce it, but you're not him, so you won't know. Shyam Sundar from the South Asian Network for Development and Environmental Economics in an article in Nature last year. As the global population increases towards 9 billion people, sustainable development should be seen as an economy serving society within Earth's life support system. Nested set of solutions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Krista.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Knott and Hilda, for having me here. The presentations today, I mean, so many amazing projects, and I agree with Travis. We need a lot more of those. It's not a matter of, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. We already know a lot of the easy things and smart things we need to be doing. A lot of these ideas have been around for a couple decades at this point. We are constrained by our capacity. One of the things that constrains that capacity is the coordination that has to happen between the different agencies and jurisdictions and funding sources and all these things. So all the projects that we've heard about today, it took a lot of work on the back end, behind the scenes, to line up all those pieces that need to occur for any one project. That time is not paid for by anybody. So it comes out of either your profit if you're a private company or your grant funding if you're a nonprofit. And neither your customers, whether it's the grantor or the funder, want to pay for that time, but they want the project to get done. I think that so I'm a faculty here in the Price School. One of the other programs here in the Price School is the Real Estate Development Program. In that world, they have a position called a broker, whose job it is to go between the builders and the project creators and designers and the funders and the regulators, and they're the ones who kind of go between all these groups and make things happen, make a deal, right? Make a deal, make a difference. In the environmental planning world, there's no real role. That's not really kind of a valued position. I think that is something that needs to be addressed in order for more of these projects, from the people that we heard from today, for more of these projects to be happening at a much larger and faster rate. I was just up in Sacramento at the Council for the California Watershed Action Network. Just had a Watershed Day at the Capitol event last week. And we heard from a number of the state elected officials. And they were talking a lot about the drought emergency and the new bond that's going to be put on the next ballot. Somewhere around $6 to $7 or maybe $8 billion that is going to be spent on water infrastructure over the life of that bond. There's 10 versions of that bond right now. I guess they're going to make a decision by sometime towards the end of June as to which version will end up being what's on the ballot. In none of those versions is there any funding for the types of positions for the people who act as coordinators between these great entities. So if that role isn't valued, if that's not someone's job to do that kind of coordination, a lot of these great projects end up sitting around for decades because there's no one to kind of, it's like we do that. All of us kind of project designer, planner people, we all come up with great projects. We've seen great projects and they just kind of sit around for a long time. Or if we're lucky, they get implemented or partially implemented or something. But that could be happening at a much greater rate if this particular type of role were acknowledged and valued by the state and also by local government. With that, I want to say thank you to everybody who presented today. It's very inspiring to see the kinds of projects that the people here are doing. It's very encouraging and gives me great hope.
I'm reaching out to incredible big sources of funding to support my initial seed funding to create Space Center, which is also all about water. Because it's a city here in California, and our aspiration, and the mayor of the city is my partner in it, is to create potentially a showcase for everything that all of you were talking about here, and create something of splendid quality. Also remembering that in a space out there, our planet is defined by one incredible quality. We have water, so even use it symbolically. Thank you for having this event. Thank you for opening it to people from outside, although I'm a frequent visitor here at the school, semi-frequent. Would love to invite you to come and do it again. Would love to invite you to the city of Longcore, which happens to be the partner in this endeavor.
My own experience, studying within the IR theoretical framework. It's very broad, it's very general. I have a little bit of experience on the national and state legislator water policies, but at the local level, where, and this is to anybody, where do you guys see kind of the main problem for implementing, water sustainability projects? Is it the policy level? I heard a little bit about the bureaucratic politics on the LA agencies. Is it the business community, or is it the sheer lack of public attention?
I have a project that I started in the San Fernando Valley. I won't mention what agency or anything like that, but it's started 11 years ago. The person who was a council person of that became city controller, ran for mayor, is off to running for Congress. All that time, the project is not built and finished. And it's everything and everything. It's a stone's throw away from tree people. And unless you rattle cages and become difficult, So education, I guess I would say.
I think it's a combination of many things. I do think that the policies are very important. Financing is important. Somebody promoting it and sponsoring is important. So it's a number of things. So if you are trying to implement a project, you need to get all these elements together so that it's implemented.
Every year, the sector, the nonprofit sector, does a survey of how much money goes to each of the sectors within the nonprofit sector. How much do you think of the pie goes to environment plus animals? Because we're lumped in, and environment and animals are lumped together. What percentage of that pie goes to environment plus animals? You're smart. You're already educated. It's 3%. You're very close. And
it's
so
how much, sorry?
3%. 3% of that pie goes to environment plus animals. So all the humane societies, all of those. So if you want to have more nonprofits, money doesn't grow on trees, and it has to come from somewhere. We can try. So we have to, I think funding is one of the very big issues.
Yeah.
And it's not just us. The cities need funding to implement all of these great projects.
I'm one of those that have followed Propo from day one. I was in city council. It's basically a $500 million failure. 1 or 2 projects are good, but it's all hype with no operation and maintenance money. Going to why you need an elected official, because they are required by law for general plans and other things. All built environment, as the couple presented. And with that, they're hiding things. They're hiding the infrastructure, the pipelines, the broken things, the money needed. It's in the billions, but they won't release it to the projects. There's no report that really releases what is needed. So what are we missing? We don't have in the structure of government that analysis of a cost factor. What is the cost of this? Is it better to let DWP recycle underground and have the public health laws over them? Or is it better for Bureau of Sanitation to put it in a tank and grow bacteria and have the county say it's okay? There's really no cost factor assigned and no one looking at how to develop that. The data is lean, if not even given at all. So it's not so much the nonprofit world. I have problems that you think you're going to educate the public. When you educate them, they always go to the one they get the bill from, DWP. It's not all their problem, So I think with that, you really need to outreach in maybe another symposium and start looking at some of these factors to make this viable. I've never seen wildlife. I live in the hills. I love it because I have everything natural there. But I don't see wildlife in any community plans. They'll take the horse trails out because maybe they could build a home there instead. I mean, there's a disconnect here because they're not even applying what's on the books now for laws.
When we're building anything, we are having to adhere to the codes of different agencies that have different purposes. And so even if they have open budgets, sometimes they're so, trying to adhere to what their charge is, it's very hard for them to integrate everything the way that we would like them to. And so even if we see an opportunity for innovation, sometimes the charge of the agency requires us to very strictly stick to what they want. So I think that's part of the problem, honestly, in what you're talking about. I think. That's just the sense that I have as a designer.
All right. Well,
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's one aspect of that I think I've been noticing in some field trips I've been taking my students on, which is going to parks that were built with bond funds, and then the money's not there in the agency to take care of it. This is a huge issue, all right? And if you go and you look at the South LA Wetlands Park, it's new, so it's still kind of shiny, but it appears to me, and Mia can confirm or deny this, it was built to not require there to be ongoing effort, and it was built to be sort of transparent to the community. The surveillance in terms of keeping people behaving is because you can look through the fences and see what's going on. And I think it's designed to have a minimum need for ongoing maintenance, because this is a huge issue. I agree completely that we fund things with bonds and then there's no money for operations and maintenance and upkeep and whatnot and program. And it's a testament to Prop 13 basically, that we have this system in the state of California where we've starved revenues for operations and maintenance. By the same token, we're willing to borrow on bonds and pay but it can only go to that construction. So I think you hit on a very important issue that people in the design world are trying to grapple with in a very serious way, because they know that.
We have heard about the barriers, but we all know the barriers. We live with the status quo. So I want to comment, first of all, we know the barriers. They're political, they're financial, they're personal. How do you change people? Well, I happen to live in a community where no one wants to change the lush green look, myself, and that's an ongoing discussion. But we've also seen, as I say, the options. I think what we're looking at here is the challenge of going to scale. How do you take good ideas and move them to scale, which each one of you are dealing with all the time. We all, in other areas, are dealing with them. And that's the real issue now. And I think Maria has given us a hint when she said, the issue is adaptation, and adaptation because of climate change. This is not going to be a matter of free will. This is going to be a matter of far, far less available water. And so the only question to me is this foot race between the downsides of having less water, the discomfort, the disruption, and being thoughtful enough and having enough leaders, I'm not sure 4 million, but enough to move our communities forward. And frankly, I see, although maybe I see through a looking glass here, I see we're really almost at a tipping point in this society. There really is, for the first time, at least my recollection, and I'm a native Californian, so I've been through many of the cycles, the first time where people, not just leaders and water users and water agencies, but the public is starting to recognize it just can't continue. Now, what that new vision is fascinating, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And there are a lot of different landscapes that different people think are beautiful. I would say the answer is to ask our students and ask our children's children what's beautiful today. Because this is an aesthetic question. It is not an engineering question. It's not, if you will, an inherently answerable question. But to the extent to which young people start seeing things differently, and I mean visually, about water, about landscapes, about how much they need. We heard about Brisbane going down to 30 gallons per, I don't know if people know here, but here in the city, here in Los Angeles, it's 120. But for Californians, on average, it's 240 gallons per person. So Californians are, shall we say it, by comparison, very rich in water. So are we at that tipping point is the only question. And I really appreciate Hilda for putting this together so we could all reflect on these issues and be part of the change. Not just watch it, but be part of that change.
Thank you.
Thank you.